Ivan Lendl and Martina Navratilova and a bunch of people. There were a whole bunch of great tennis players from Czechoslovakia. You know, it makes you think. Doesn't it make you think that maybe it's not an accident, you know, that there were great tennis players from Czechoslovakia, that somehow there's a reason why people can flourish. And it may not be genetic, and it may not be associated with any virtues of the individual, but it may be associated with what kind of experiences they're nurtured in and what things can emerge from them. You know, frankly, I find our profession in some ways sort of daunting and a little bit frightening, because what we're really in the business of doing is changing lives of human beings. That's the goal of what we're about. And it really makes a difference what we do or don't do. It really makes a difference. And you know, I mentioned these tennis players, but let's think about a math example. R.H. Bing was a famous mathematician. He was a member of the National Academy of Sciences, a topologist. And in the 1930s, he graduated from Texas State Teachers College at that time. And he got a job as a high school teacher. And he was a high school teacher and the football coach in his high school. And he was doing quite well. Apparently the team won some games, lost some. You know, he was doing all right. And he would teach math. And the Texas legislature had passed a law that said that if a high school teacher got a master's degree, they'd get a better salary, get a salary increase. And so he went back to the University of Texas, and at the University of Texas, taking summer classes in mathematics to get a master's degree and get more money as a high school teacher, he ran into R.L. Moore. And R.L. Moore discovered that he was able to prove theorems. You know, he nurtured this talent of R.H. Bing, and Bing went on to be able to prove these wonderful theorems in topology, became a member of the National Academy of Sciences, was a great success in his life. Now, he might have been even better as a high school teacher. We don't know that. He might have changed high school education or something like that. You know, so I'm not saying that the fact of his having the experience of an inquiry kind of a class, you know, made him live a better life than he otherwise would have. I can't say that. But it's certainly true that it had the effect of changing the course of his life substantially. And I think that that's what we can do. To me, I am only marginally interested in teaching mathematics. You know, I think mathematics is good, but I think that the real lessons that students come away with from our classes, some of them are mathematical, and those who go on in the profession can use those specific mathematical skills on a daily basis. But for almost all of the students we encounter in most of our classes, their future lives are not engrossed in doing mathematics on a daily basis. What they are involved with, though, is actually trying to figure out how to cope with the world, how to make decisions in everyday life, and their own families and their personal lives and their professional lives, how to be citizens of the world. You know, these are the things that really are making the difference in the daily lives of the people whom we're teaching. And so when I think about teaching and education, I always ask the question, and I try to make it inform my daily experience in the classroom. The question is, what do you want your students to get from your class that they're going to use after 20 years? Not at the end of the semester, 20 years, 30 years. What's going to make a difference? And what specific differences do you expect to be made because of what you did in your class? So this is a question I'm going to pose for you right now, because I think it's the question for educators. It's the 20-year question. What are they going to keep from the class in 20 years? And so here's the format for the morning. for my part of this morning, which is this. I'm going to first ask you that question to try to be as specific as you can. You know, it's good to be general, but let's try to be as specific as you can about what you hope they're going to keep from your experience of your class in 20 years, 30 years. And then let's think about the question, what are the implications? What kind of format in the class, what kind of experiences would we construct in the class to accomplish the goals that, you know, we as a group actually believe to be the goals of education? Sound all right? Okay, so let's go ahead and start. So right now what I want you to do is just talk to people around you, and get out a piece of paper, if you have a piece of paper, please, and write down what you think are the things that you would hope in 20 or 30 years that the students are going to keep from your class. Oh, by the way, wait, I made a mistake already. I forgot. I actually learned something on one of these sessions, which was that I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do this, and I don't have it embedded in my consciousness enough. No, you shouldn't talk to your neighbor right away. You should take 1 minute and think about it. No, really, and somebody told me this, and it actually it's a good idea. And it's just that sometimes I forget, so I remembered at the last minute. So take 1 minute before you talk to your neighbor and think about this question yourself. Okay, so think about it right now in silence. Okay, go. Okay, now talk. I find it weird, that silence, you know. I mean, what happens is I'm afraid you're all asleep. This is, I'm really quite concerned. So. Just a minute here. Elizabeth was talking about communication. I think Bill last night also mentioned communication is one of the serious parts of it. Namely, being able to communicate clearly, precisely. Say what you mean what you say. really, what does it mean? One of the basic things that's going to happen, so you're going to write up on the board, communication. Heather, is it Heather?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Heather is the scribe, and she can edit as she wishes to improve things as she writes. So one of the basic things is communicating. This is something that people will do in whatever their walk of life is, and in their personal life, every aspect of life, they're going to be communicating. And you know perfectly well, if you can improve their ability to say what they mean what they say, and to think more clearly about making, even complicated statements meaningful, boy, what a change in the way that they would live their lives. So that's a very basic, important goal. I think that's definitely worthy of the list. So that's a great example. Doug was saying that one of the things that he would like to do is to ask people to see that there's mathematics in the world. And maybe you should give your example of Egypt as an example.
Well, what I was, in the morning I usually pick up the New York Times and I'll read these stories. And everywhere I see these, hidden under the surface is mathematics, which is usually not brought out by the person who's writing the article. And, one of the things that disturbs me is the fact that Americans are not as literate when it comes to mathematics as they should be if they really want to understand world events. And that includes understanding things like the magnitudes of various effects, what is likely to be important. I don't think there's a good understanding of whether something that occurred reflects, a larger trend, or whether it's just an isolated example, for example. And I think the ability to think about mathematics and build models of phenomena is one of the things that students should learn in their college education. I don't think it's emphasized enough.
All right. Go ahead, talk. To each other. Okay, Nina, what do you have as an example of something you'd like to see your students do? Okay. Nina?
The ability to persist, like a certain amount of grit in overcoming things that are difficult, persisting.
So when faced with some challenging thing, one habit people sometimes have is just to give up. That they don't really feel confident that they can make progress by persistently thinking about it. So persistence, I think, is one of the main things that we can teach people. To be able to think about the same thing for, instead of 1 minute, think about it for 5 minutes. Well, that's a huge change. And in fact, by the way, this is, I think, one of the systematic errors we make in mathematics education, which is this. Look at the experience that most students have in all of their mathematics classes. Question is asked. The teacher turns around and writes down the correct answer. Right? So the student or the teacher is lecturing, gives the lecture. Everything's right. Where does the student see modeled in front of them the reality of the effort required to actually be able to get that answer? They don't see it. And of course, they're going to interpret the world as it is presented to them. And if what they see is, well, if you're good at math, what that means is when somebody asks a question, you write down the correct answer. That's what the image of mathematics is going to be to them. You see? So that's one of the byproducts of not having visible the reality of the effort involved in actually making progress in mathematics. So that's something we can do. Persistence. Jacob? Is it Jacob? No, what's your name? I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Jason.
Jason. What do you have?
I had to think critically about how to teach and foster learning in the actual teachers themselves and to their students.
So critical thinking.
Snowball effect.
Critical thinking. So if you could get people to think critically. Now, one thing about critical thinking is that it's not clear what it means. You know, it's a phrase, and we need to really go one step deeper about saying, or several steps deeper, about what exactly are the mental habits that we wish to instill in the students so that they use them in every part of their lives. So that's one of the things that we're going to be discussing in a few minutes, is try to expand that critical thinking. And then somebody else mentioned problem solving as a basic goal, being able to problem solve. What exactly do those things mean? So we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But let's carry on for once again, talk about what we learned.
So even that they carry with them a view of math that isn't procedural, so that they know if they ever need to take math again, they don't have this negative attitude. And also, even if they're not teachers, they may have children, and that they transmit a more positive idea of what mathematics is to them.
Okay, so positive idea. So now talk to each other for a minute here. Talk to each other. Talk to each other. Okay, so let me ask Chris, do you have something? Chris?
Yeah, curiosity and interest in how other people think.
Curiosity and interest. Let's just leave it at curiosity and interest. I think one of the main things that we can either instill...
No, he wants to listen to other people's thinking. That's the part.
Yeah, and I'm ignoring that.
And I said, just so you know,
I am... By the way, as you will notice, that what I'm actually doing is modeling a strategy of instruction. That's what the point of this is. And one of the things I think that's very important in this model is when you hear something, you say what you wish they had said.
You twist their words.
You twist their words, and if you need to. Now, by the way, I also completely agree. I mean, Bill, I went to Bill's session yesterday morning, and part of it was, I think, extremely important in this point, which was you actually have to listen to what they actually say, not what you hope they had said. So I do think it's extremely important to listen to what is actually said by the students. But on the other hand, it also is very helpful sometimes to listen to something that's almost right or something. If you're trying to make a point, and you listen and you hear what you wish they had said, and then you explain. You explain it back to the class. You know, so if you ask a question and they made some error, even a trivial error, multiplication error, something like that, and then you go ahead and explain it back, doing it correctly. I think that's a valid strategy for getting people to think. Chris doesn't agree, though. You see, now what are we going to do? He's mad. Yeah, well, I don't blame him. Okay.
Well, he can rebel.
Yeah, he can rebel. He can rebel. But the point is, the reason that I want to aim more broadly. I mean, he talked about critical curiosity about other people's thinking. The reason I want to be more broad about it is because curiosity. I mean, look, that makes a huge difference in your life. If you can teach a person to be curious about the world and to be always inquisitive about what's going on around them, well, that is absolutely revolutionary in the way that they conduct their lives. So to me, part of the goal, and that's why I love this question. And by the way, no, something else that I'm modeling, which is that I'm walking around while people are talking to each other, and I'm listening to ideas that are being said, and then I pick on the people who I want to hear. You see? I mean, there are lots of ideas around here, and by the way, lots of good ideas. I'm not saying that the ones that I don't, choose to elaborate are not as good. I'm just saying that sometimes you want to bring up things, and the reason I wanted to bring up curiosity, and that I thought this was a great thing, is that it has to do with the affect, the enjoyment of the thinking process. Here's what I think about teaching. Look, after they're done with school, after they have left the classroom, they don't have any more homework, they don't have any more tests, what's their motivation for having the kind of improved being that we're hoping to have instilled in them? It's got to be something that comes from them. It's got to be their own, motivation. And to me, things like curiosity are one of the basic things that drive people to actually go ahead and do the thinking. You see? And then the question becomes, what can we do in the class that creates that motivation? That's why I was talking to some people this morning about assessment and saying, last night we had a short discussion of assessment and I didn't say anything. And I'm very proud of myself for not saying anything because I have nothing to say on assessment, And the reason is that when I think about the 20-year lesson, I'm thinking about what are people going to do after the coercion of assessment is behind them. You see what I mean? So to me, it's always been a problem. I mean, I understand you get them in habits and then maybe the habits persist, but to me, I really try to make the motivation of what they're going to do day to day in their class come from their enjoyment of the thinking process. I try to make that happen. Now, by the way, I give grades and tests and stuff, so it's not. That's why I don't have a lot to say about it. But in any case, I do think that trying to think about, are we creating an atmosphere in which their motivations are more intrinsic is a valuable thing. And curiosity is one of them. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, problem solving. Okay, let's see. Are there other ones that people would like to say? Yes, go ahead.
I want them to be able to recognize and question their assumptions.
Question assumptions. Skepticism? Yes. And what's your name? Sue.
Yeah. I want them to learn the structure of mathematics. That is big ideas. I don't want them just learn some single piece of knowledge and isolate it. I want them to know the connections between the big ideas.
Okay. So big ideas in mathematics. And by the way, I would say, let's put down, make mathematics meaningful. Several other people, somebody else mentioned something related to this, that you don't want mathematics to be a rote collection of discrete little ideas, because those are the ones that are sure to leave. Those are ones that people are not going to, they're not going to last. So what will last is the idea that the way you come about getting to mathematics or other subjects is by thinking clearly about what it is that drives you toward this construct. So it's big ideas and the making mathematics meaningful. It's not just arbitrary. And that, I think, is a very important part. Yes? And what's your name?
Paulina. I think in addition to seeing mathematics in the real world and making mathematics meaningful, I also like them to understand that mathematics gives them power. It gives them the ability to do things that they would not otherwise be able to do. And they get that from modeling the mathematics in the real world and really working with the applicability of it and making sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's that power that's big for me as well.
Okay. And by the way, it's not just mathematics. I think it's just logical thinking, clear thinking. I think it's beyond mathematics. You know, most people, the reality is most people do not, consciously think about mathematics in their everyday lives. It's not, and by the way, I don't think it's nearly good enough for us to say our goal is to, on those few occasions when you can use an algebraic equation to figure out your mortgage or something, that's not a worthy goal for us in teaching mathematics. We're much more fundamental. Our goals are much more fundamental. We are after the big fish, which is to get people to be able to think clearly no matter what it is that they're thinking about. And it may not be overtly mathematical at all, but we recognize it as having to do with logical and clear thinking. Okay. So change that to appreciate the power of clear thinking. See, I'm editing the thing. Yes, sir. Alfonso.
I want to complain about the last thing. I do agree that more work is also more important than being able to understand their mortgage. But I believe if they are not able to understand their mortgage, we have failed them.
I totally agree.
So that being able to understand their mortgage, there's a photo and all that, or we have to put it in, we have to include it in the test.
Yeah, that's what I want to say. I had a student come to me once and said, I have to make a 3.5% down payment. Can you tell me, do you know how to calculate it? It was even worse. And I said, you are in Introduction to Statistics, you should be able to calculate 3.5% of the sum. She said, no, I never was able to do that. I think if they never cross the I'm afraid of math, I don't know how to do 2 plus 2, they will never see the beauty of mathematics and the power. I mean, it's just, yes, we have very big goals, but we won't get there if they don't even want to think about it for a second.
I think if that student had the ability to persist and was maybe a little bit curious and appreciated the power of clear thinking and was able to do it, he never would have come to you.
I agree.
And I think if we don't shoot for something interesting, if they think it's about the mortgage, how are you ever going to be curious?
I think the problem is that, I agree with you, by the way, about the person who's afraid of the mathematics, afraid of the mortgage. That is a problem. But the instinctive response, which is, oh, well, then let's put mortgages in the curriculum. That's what's wrong. That's what the mistake is. And so that's what this whole conference is about. It's about saying, what kind of experiences lead the person to develop the mental strength and the attitudes that will allow them to continue to improve in their ability to think throughout their lives. That's our goal. Alfonso?
What you're saying basically is that being able to understand the mortgage is going to have to follow from this.
Correct.
Be a consequence of this.
That's correct. That's correct. In fact, let me talk about Bill's class yesterday. I mean, I was in the class. And he showed some videos and then also demonstrated this idea of he was talking about the real number line. Half of you were there and half were in the other group. He was talking about the real number line and starting with a very simple subtraction problem, and then from there, step after step after step, enrich the concept so that the concept of number becomes just much more rich and meaningful. And that was the goal. And I looked at that, and by the way, I watched a short video clip of actual students at work on the same question. And I said to myself, this was my reaction to it. I said, if you had kids in that kind of a classroom, it's inevitable that they will have a clear understanding of mathematics, and these kinds of questions would never arise. It's absolutely inevitable. If they go through that kind of experience day by day, of course they're going to come to an understanding. Of course they're going to be in the habit of clear thinking. Because that's what they're doing every single day. They're modeling this idea of saying, okay, I'm going to express myself clearly about the mathematics. I'm going to understand how, and he was talking about the number line. And of course, that's a great model. And I think it's important that's getting across the specifics of a concept of number. But beyond that, just the mode by which this is being communicated was causing the students on an everyday basis to be thinking through what it is they were getting into their heads. They were making reality. They were making meaning. And to me, that process is what we want to model for them to practice in their lives after they finished. Forever. You know, you think of the difference between, and I have to say that when we talk about things like coverage, I'm thinking to myself, well, really? You know, you have college, you know, you've got college. And in this one semester, you do a certain amount of stuff. What we're really talking about is their lives. Whether they get 10% more in that particular semester, if they quit learning when they finish college, it doesn't matter what you taught them. It's not enough. That's not the person you want to create. You don't want to have a person who's quit learning when their school stopped. And so if that's the effect, if your trade-off is a little bit more in that semester and then it ends when we're done with school, that's a very bad trade-off. I often think, we're in a time of change. Think about our moment in history. Suppose that you could literally tell, say, a computer science student every single thing there is to know about computer science today. You know? I mean, it's laughable. Would that last them the rest of their careers in computer science? I mean, nobody would say that. Of course not. They have to be in a position to learn. And by the way, let me just say about this moment of history thing. This is the first time in human history that essentially all knowledge is available on your cell phone, right? Essentially all factual knowledge is available. And in mathematics, all the procedural stuff is instantly doable by a computer. Now, are we going to say, oh, well, that doesn't matter, we'll do the same thing we did 20 years ago? Well, I don't think so. Because the point is it makes it so overt. It's the elephant in the room. We have to focus on teaching people to think better. It's not good enough to say, oh, well, at least they learn these procedures. What possible value is that compared to the value of actually having them be able to think for themselves? And so we've got to construct, and I think this is the huge challenge for education altogether. We've got to face the reality that when people have in their minds, well, the main issue of education is for somebody who knows something to stand up and talk to somebody who doesn't know it. I think Brian used that metaphor yesterday. The point is that that's not good enough. That's really not what we're about. We have to be in the business of teaching people to think better. Okay? So, So let me, maybe, would you like to sit down? Feel free to. And thank you. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about, one of the goals of inquiry-based learning and of education in general is to getting people to learn to think better. And so I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about what that might mean. What does it actually mean to be able to think better? This is a question. I don't see Ted Mahaver here. Is he? He's not here?
No, I think he left.
Oh, he left? He left, yeah. But I was going to tell you that I was giving a talk the other day, and Ted was there, and after my talk, I said, well, how did it go? And what did you think? And he said, well, I'm sure it was fine, but I quit listening, so. Which makes me, this is part of the lecture method, you have to be realistic. What are people actually doing when you imagine that you're saying these eloquent things? They're probably half of you are asleep. I don't know what's in your heads. That's the amazing thing about, no, it's really true. It's really true. Some of you are thinking, you're going off on airplanes and stuff and you're thinking about the weekend. It's just true. It's just true. Let's admit it, I like reality. I think it's more fun to deal with reality than in any case. Okay, so so I wanted to tell you. So my co-author Ed Berger is a co-author of mine, and we've written a couple of books, and we just wrote this book that Elizabeth mentioned, The 5 Elements of Effective Thinking, which I have right here. It's a pocket book, and it's in my pocket. You see, and some people think, well, I mean, I'm excited about this book. That's why I mention it. And some people think, oh, it's too commercial to mention. Do you think that? Some of you think, oh, this is too commercial. And I think just the opposite, because we've worked on this thing for 8 years, by the way. Literally 8 years ago, we started writing this thing. And the goal of it was to answer the question, what does it mean to think effectively? And to help people to adopt those strategies. And so, I mean, it's my life's work, to really try to get this across. And so I really do want to try to get across these ideas. And I'll start by just saying some. So there are 5 elements, it turns out, of effective thinking. Did you know that? No. So I'll tell you what they are. So the first one, so that way you don't have to buy the book. The first one.
Will it change in the second edition?
I don't think this is the kind of book that has the editions, by the way. Right. The 6 elements of effective thinking. So, yeah.
It's the edition number plus 5.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So the first one is I'll give you an example of this. The first one is understand simple things deeply. And once again, Bill's session yesterday morning, we were talking about the number line. And to me, it is so powerful to realize that even as us, as professionals in mathematics, when we look at the really basic concepts of number, you see different things in it. It's just amazing to me that it just opens up. It's like like a telescope or a microscope. You just see more there when you turn your mind toward the basics. So understand simple things deeply. And I'm going to tell you a story that is out of the mathematics world and that sort of illustrates this in a good way, which is this, that a friend of mine whose name is Tony Plogue is an international virtuoso trumpet player. So he plays in these really elite trumpet groups. He lives in Germany, and a few years ago, he was invited to come to the University of Texas at Austin, where he's a composer, and one of his works was being premiered by the University of Texas, and he was invited to come down for the premiere. And so he came and he stayed at my house. And while he was there, he was invited to give a master class in trumpet to the students at Texas. And I had never been to a master class in a music thing, so I asked him if I could come along. He said, sure, come along to the master class. Have you all been to a master class in an instrument? Have you? What
Cello when I was a
cello when you were a kid? You were?
Oh yeah, I've been
Many times. Okay. So I had never been to one. And here's the way that it worked. There were about 20 people in the audience, and and my friend was introduced, and so he stood up front, and there was a piano there and an accompanist, and he said, who's the first performer? And then the first kid came down who was the guinea pig, for the thing. And so this guy came down, and he was let's call his name John. I forgot his name. Say John. He comes down, and by the way, there were 4 people who played during this master class, and they were all PhD students in trumpet performance. So and by the way, the University of Texas is a great music school. So these kids were really excellent trumpet players. And so Tony said, John, what are you going to play for us today? And John said, well, I'm going to play part of the third movement of the Rachmaninoff, whatever it was. And then he proceeded to play for 3 or 4 minutes this really virtuosic trumpet work. And he sounded great. Believe me, he sounded great. And he was, he was really an excellent trumpet player. And then Tony said, oh, very good, very good. By the way, Tony's a very nice guy. He says, very good, sounded great, and I'll give you some tips on this. You could have made the sound explode more on this and make this sound different. And he gave the sort of usual things that you would expect a a professional player to give tips about how to play the thing. And then he said, how much time do you spend playing the exercises? Apparently there's a guy who wrote trumpet exercises, like Hanon is for the piano, sort of simple exercises. He said, how much time do you spend practicing these simple exercises? And John said, well, I warm up for, 5 minutes when I start practicing, and then I practice my pieces. And Tony said, well, you might spend a little more time doing those exercises, and, he didn't make a big deal of it. He just said it and went on to the next player. And Mary comes up and does the same thing, plays this virtuosic thing. He gives an instruction about it and then says, how much time do you spend practicing the exercises? Oh, just a few minutes. He said, oh, you might practice more. Okay, so this happened 4 times. And at the end of those four people, it's a 2-hour thing, and it was getting near the end of the thing. And he said, well, are there any questions? And so, I'm sitting in the room. Of course, they're going to have a question. So I raised my hand. I said, why do you keep telling the kids to play these exercises? And he said, he said, I'll show you. And he said, John, would you come back? And so John comes back up, and John, would you play the exercise? And so John plays this exercise, da, 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 some very simple, and all we had heard was this virtuosic stuff. And then this childish, da, 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 and I thought, well, that's interesting. And then Tony said, Tony then, for the first time and only time, he took the trumpet. He said, could I borrow your trumpet? He hadn't played before. He took the trumpet, and he played the exercise. Da, 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 da. And it was gorgeous. It was absolutely gorgeous. Every note rung like a bell. It was just gorgeous. The shape of the phrase was delightful. He made music out of that little exercise that was far beyond the ability of this kid, who was a really excellent trumpet player. Way beyond. And so you could see where the difference was between the real international virtuoso and this really excellent student. The difference wasn't at their ability to play these high, fast notes. It occurred at the very most fundamental level. And Tony explained it, by the way. I mean, it was no secret. He said, look, if you practice playing these fundamentals with such control and precision and shape that it becomes efficient to do it that way, then when you extend yourself to the very limits of your ability, you're going to be able to control the production of the sound so much that you can make beauty out of that really high-end sound. It makes a huge difference. And to me, this was, what a great example of understand simple things deeply. That when you return to the basics, if you were a beginner, you could never learn to just play those exercises at that high level. You can't do it then. You had to have proceeded on to more advanced work and then returned to look again at the basics. And then you see in those basics something different. It becomes richer. It's more fundamental. You see relationships that you didn't see before. And to me, this is a great example. In mathematics, we tend to just go forward. How about returning from time to time and asking people to reflect on very basic things? And once again, I think of Bill's class. How about a person who really is quite advanced in mathematics to go back and do the kinds of exercises that he was doing, or that they were even doing with these children, but they're going to see something different about it. They're really going to understand that the fundamentals of the subject in a deeper way. So what I'd like you to do right now is to see. So I've done something here, which is to give you an example of in a subject that's not related to the subject we're talking about. And so one thing I'm curious about is, do you think that having this example in music, which is not mathematics that we're talking about, is that a defect? Would it have been better to give an example where I asked you know, where I gave an example of somebody who was studying calculus and then they learned something about, you know, numbers better, that or functions or something, and to illustrate the point. So that's one question. Is it better or worse to have the example be in a totally different subject? So that's question number one. And then question number two is I would like you to right now talk to the people around you and see if this does resonate for you. What specific example would you ask your students to do to accomplish this in a particular subject that you're trying to get across? What would you ask them to do that would be the understand simple things deeply for the subject that you are trying to get across? Do you follow? Does that sound like a reasonable question? Do you understand the question? Okay, talk it over, talk it over, talk it over. Just take 2 minutes, talk it over. I want an example. To apply it to a mathematical subject. So something you're teaching, you know, algebra or something, whatever it is you're teaching. I want it to be, I want you to apply the concept, but in the math world. Okay, so let's harvest some ideas here. David, would you say your example?
Yes. Yesterday, Quincy Moon, who left, gave a talk about high school students trying to find this equation for the circle and understand what the equation was. And the tendency there was to try to do some kind of manipulations of some sort and remember something they were taught, or some equation or something, and really taking the approach that Mike is advocating. I think the appropriate thing to do is try to look at it in a simple way. And you say, well, can I find one point that equation satisfies, one x and y that satisfies? Find a few points on it, right, rather than trying to do something fancy. And that same idea comes up constantly in my classes where I ask them to prove a theorem and they're trying to put together some fancy proof, and I say, well, back off and just look at a simple example of what this is talking about and see if you can see why it's true.
Yeah, and by the way, this is, you know, in practice, what you might want to think about doing is just, as you're proceeding on, it's not a question of just saying, okay, we're going to just start at the fundamentals and then work from there in every class. No, you're moving forward, but just from time to time in the course of it, not making a big deal of it, but going back and doing exactly what David just said. Okay, what's the simplest thing? Look at a single point. What's a simple example of this? And just don't let the fundamentals leave the discourse of the classroom. You know, come back from time to time. And then they begin to see those basics as more central. By the way, because I don't know when to stop, so you're going to have to tell me.
Well, everything got pushed back because of the...
Right, that's why I don't know.
Right, we were going to do that in the afternoon when I learned how many people were leaving. So,
yeah.
You know, so another 15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay, that'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so very good. So let me then, since we've got 4 more elements, yeah, so, let me say something else about this element. Oh, I did want to take a poll. How many people think that it was... so you have 3 choices: better, the same, worse, to give the example in a completely different field. I gave the example as a trumpet player and when I was really talking about how to improve your teaching of mathematics. Do you think it was better, actually better, and why? Did you think it was the same, you could accomplish the same thing in math, or worse, that it would have been better to have the example as a mathematical example? So let's just vote, and just because I'm curious. How many people think it was worse? Worse. Okay, Alfonso? How many people think it was neutral? You could have gone either way and accomplished the same thing. Okay, so they're more of the neutral. And how many people think it was actually better? Okay. Okay, yeah, and the reason I did it... Oh, do you have a reason?
I have a statement that I think that's a false dilemma question. I think there's another option.
Good. What?
Yes, I think it depends.
It depends, sure, of course.
Why did you give both?
Yes, give both would have been maybe even better. Yeah, and but I'll tell you one of the reasons. I'll tell you my motive, why I did it this way. I mean, I think about these things. The reason I did it is this: that one of the things that you want your students to do is to process things. You know, to actually take an active role in how it is that they're dealing with what it is that you're telling them to do. So if I give an example that's not in mathematics at all, it absolutely requires an effort on your part to then translate that into the domain in which you're working. So I thought, well, isn't it worth a try? And Alfonso didn't agree, and there we have it. You know, so that's it. No, and you know, maybe for a good reason. So, okay, so that's another thing that I in the understand deeply theme is to be honest about what a person knows and doesn't know. You know, just being honest about it. I mean, if you wanted to change a life, if you got people to actually just, you know, say what they know, say what they don't know, and just be comfortable in operating always at that level of reality, it would make a huge, huge difference. Because what really happens is that we systematically, in the way that we promote instruction in our classes and in our culture, is we systematically encourage people to pretend to know things they do not know. To pretend they know more than they know. And the effect is very deleterious to the students. Deleterious. Which is it?
Harmful.
Deleterious? Thank you. It's harmful. It's harmful. Thank you. Yes?
I just have a question. I want to clarify that. So are people pretending that they know, and it's a charade that everyone carries out?
Yes.
Or is it that people think that they know things that they don't actually know?
Both. Yes, in fact, it's a wonderful distinction, and both of them are true. But yes, and in fact, the danger, and one of the reasons that it is so deleterious or harmful is, or deleterious, I don't know. I'll have to look this up. I don't know. One of the reasons is that you begin to fool yourself. That's where the problem really comes. There's a great quote from Will Rogers who said, It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you do know that ain't so. You know, what you do know that's not so. If people pretend to themselves, and by the way, I have over the years met some really famous people, Nobel Prize winners and so on, and CEOs of companies. And one thing I've noticed about them, and I always look, well, what's the difference between those people and other people, And one thing that I notice is that they do not horse around pretending to know things they don't know. If you're in a room with one of these people and you're at a math talk, math person, they're not going to say, they're not having the internal conversation. Ooh, I should remember that definition and I can't remember it. I'm going to just keep quiet in the back. They're going to say, I've forgotten the definition, tell it to me. Let's move on. They're just not going to horse around pretending to know what they don't know. And I have a friend who was working at Disney Corporation, and he had a meeting with the CEO of Disney, and talking about, he was producing CDs and stuff. And he said this guy, didn't know some really basic thing about CDs. Didn't know something, and that everybody should have known, everybody in the room, And the guy just said, okay, just tell me what it is. There was no hesitation at all in just admitting that he didn't know this basic fact, and just moves on, Because then you're not wasting your time. You're really working at your own, level of what it is that you know and don't know. The question is, how do you detect which things you know and don't know is a huge, huge problem. Heather?
I guess I always verbalize it like, I don't feel stupid for not knowing something. I feel stupid for not being able to figure something out.
Well, that's another question. I mean,
students, like, if you don't know something, you can obtain that.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in college, I was in an art history class, and this art history class was taught by a really old professor. Her name was Miss Frisch. She was really old and very scholarly, And we thought she knew so much about Gothic cathedrals because she had been there when they were built. So what we thought. And so she was showing some, Byzantine paintings and where the hands are way too long and the head is too short, that kind of thing. And she showed this picture on the thing, and then the dreaded words, Mr. Starbird, would you tell us what you see, in this picture? And the picture had, a halo going over the head, and these really crazy things. And but I had been in art history classes. I knew what you were supposed to say. Art has meaning, So I said, well, that halo represents the dawn of humanity into the arcing over to the glory of heaven and then descending into the abyss. It was wonderful, extremely eloquent. To which she replied, cut out the bull and tell me what you see. That was a life lesson, Just being honest about that. And by the way, of course, this is part of what happens in an IBL class, is honesty. It's the difference. I mean, one of the huge differences between lecturing, where you can labor under the illusion that what's going on in the minds of the students is what you anticipate going on when you give an eloquent lecture. You can labor under that illusion if you're lecturing. You can't if they're standing up and saying what's actually on their own minds. It's reality. You're dealing with the reality of what the confusions actually are when they get 99% of the way, and you say, how could they possibly not see that last step? Well, that's a moment. That's the reality of what they need to overcome in order to understand that last step, and it's an important moment. So the idea of having being really aware of what the students know and don't know, very important. Okay, so now I better hurry up through these last four elements. We haven't got past the first one yet. Okay, so the second element is fail to succeed, make mistakes. This one is one of the main strategies by which anybody who has accomplished anything in life succeeds. It's built on the ash heap of failed attempts in everything. Certainly in mathematics, but it's also true in every other endeavor. Making mistakes is not a neutral step. It's a positive step forward, because a mistake is directive. It tells you what's wrong. It gives you an opportunity to look at what's wrong and then correct that error and move on. You see? So I don't know. I told this story just a few days ago, and so a couple of you were there. But I think I'll go ahead and tell it again. Of this student in my class, Mary, who was it's a nice story and a true story. She was in a liberal arts mathematics class I was teaching, and we were talking about infinity. And we had come to the place, we talked about one-to-one correspondence, and we'd come to the theorem I wanted to get across of that the natural numbers and the rational numbers were in one-to-one correspondence, same cardinality. That's a hard theorem. And so I said to myself, my goal in this class is to teach people to think. Now, this is a hard theorem. I know they can't do it. But could I give them instruction, not in mathematics, but just in thinking, that would allow a student in this class to figure out that difficult theorem? So I proceeded as follows. I said, okay, this is a difficult theorem. I explained the theorem. You want a one-to-one correspondence, natural numbers, rational numbers. I said, it's too hard. You can't do it. Take 2 minutes and do it. Take 2 minutes and write it down. So this is a class of 50. So they said, what? You told us we couldn't do it. And so I said, just do it. The only rule is you have to actually write down an attempt. You have to put a fraction by number 1, a fraction by number 2, a fraction by number 3, and so on. That's the only rule. You have to make an attempt, and then just do it. Okay, so after 3 minutes, I was walking around as I do, and 3 minutes was over. I pointed to Mary in the back. I said, Mary, what do you have? Mary said, it's wrong. I didn't get it. I said, I know you didn't get it. Just tell me what you've got. And she, after several iterations of that dialogue, we came to say finally, okay, here's what it is. She said, I had 1, 2, and then 1 over 1, 1 over 2, 1 over 3, 1 over 4. So here's what she had. So she had 1 over 1, 1 over 2, 1 over 3, and so on. And I said, you're right, that's wrong. It's wrong. And she said, I know it's wrong. And I said, why is it wrong? And she said, well, because not all the fractions occurred. Duh. And I said, what specifically is not there? And you know what she said? What specific fraction will never appear on that list I have? What specific error did you make? Somebody said it? 2/3. 2/3. Of course, she said 2/3. I said, could you put 2/3 in the list? And she said, well, yeah, I could put 2/3 in the list. I could just, insert it between 1/3 and 1/4. I could put 2/3. And I said, okay, correct all the ones that you can correct. Take two more minutes and correct all the ones you can correct. 3 minutes, and of course everybody's doing this at once, not just she. So everybody's working on, trying to correct them. And then I say, Mary, always back to the same person, Mary, what do you have? And she said, oh, I've got it. She said, here it is. I did 1 over 1, 1 over 1, 1 over 2, 1 over 3, 2 over 3, 1 over 4, 3 over 4, 1 over 5, 2 over 5, 3 over 5, and so on. And I said, great. Now, are you done? And she said, yes, I'm done. I've got it. And, great. And then some other kid said, wait a minute. You forgot the fractions where the bigger numbers on top. And she said, shoot. Or words to that effect. So she said, shoot. And then I said, okay, take 2 more minutes and fix it. See, can you fix it? And after 2 more minutes, she had inserted the reciprocals after each one. She thought of just turning them over, big number on top. And then she thought she was done. Somebody else pointed out the negative numbers weren't there. She put those in between. And after 4 or 5 iterations, she had, in fact, written down a correct proof that there's a one-to-one correspondence between the natural numbers and the fractions. Now, I find this example extremely powerful because I was giving no mathematical hint, and I know I wasn't. I was thinking, well, could I have been winking or hinting? There are ways to hint that are not verbal and so on. But no, because this result is not the standard way of proving that there's a one-to-one correspondence between the natural numbers and the rationals. The standard way. You go through you sort of cycle through, you put them in a thing, you get a lot of positive ones and a lot of negative ones, a lot of positives and negatives. It's not the standard result. So I know I wasn't, and you know, in our own book, we have the standard procedure. I know I was not pushing her in the direction of this proof because I didn't know this proof. This was not the result I was aiming for. So I was thinking, wow, something important is happening here. That you can teach a person by adopting a strategy of investigation to be able to solve a difficult problem that they would not otherwise have done. And my role in this is basically non-existent. All I did is to say things that she could have said to herself. You know, try something, but actually try it. Write down that even though it's wrong, and then look at it. And say to yourself, why is it wrong? What can I do to correct exactly what I see as wrong? Can I correct those defects? And so on. And that iterative process, what a powerful example. You know, you can teach people to actually be more effective, to think better, to solve problems that are harder than they could have by a strategy of thinking, not by being brighter, not by having better parents. You know, that wasn't the strategy of getting her to solve this. You see? So I found this very powerful. And so this is element number 2, make mistakes. Make mistakes as a strategy towards success. And once again, we need to build this in systematically, I think, into our instructional methods to encourage it as part of the step towards success is to specifically make mistakes and learn from them. And so building that into the everyday experience of the classroom, which is part of what IBL does, is really productive and powerful. Okay? What do you think? Make mistakes? Worthy of being an element? Element number 2. Okay, number 3. Now we'll go really fast. So number 3, raise questions. Raise questions. Because if you get students into the habit of asking a question, then it changes how they're responding to any kind of a situation. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a student. If they're constantly asking questions, so this is the way I think about it. Suppose that you're in the audience of a speaker, you know, like right now, and you say, boy, this is boring. Well, in my opinion, you're the boring one because you haven't thought of good questions. You see what I mean? You should be constantly thinking of questions. What could be extended? What could be changed? What could be modified? How is it that whatever is being presented could be altered? You know, there are lots of questions. So in my own classes, what I do sometimes is this. I'll look at the class and I'll say, instead, are there any questions? I want to promote the idea that there are always questions. So I'll say, instead of are there any questions, I'll say, take 2 minutes, talk to your neighbor, write down 2 questions. Because I want them to always see questions. And then they've written down questions, and then I just point to people. What's your question? What's your question? What's your question? And by the way, if you do that, you'll be amazed at the questions you get. People really can think of all sorts of interesting things that are just, but if you just say, are there any questions, then if they're not the 2 or 3 who raise their hands, they're just going to sit there and wait for somebody else. You know, that's their sleep time. You see what I mean? So I think that's a neat technique for getting people involved. Okay, so that's number 3, raising questions. And by the way, one of the most fundamental questions that you can raise is, what's the real question? What's the real question? And to me, this is the fundamental question for education, and that we're talking about right now. What is the real goal? You know, and these kinds of things are the real goals. And thinking about those real goals, and then altering what you do because you're attentive to what those real goals are. Not the ephemeral goals of getting through the syllabus, but the real goals of changing those lives and making people think better. And then it makes a big difference because you make different decisions on a day-to-day basis in your class. If you're clear what the educational goal is, the lifetime changing goal. So what's the real goal? And of course, by the way, outside of mathematics, I mean, a lot of people pursue the wrong goals throughout their lives. It's really very sad. You know, they may try to get rich instead of trying to be happy. You know, and you do different things. And many people make fundamental mistakes in that way. So this is a basic question. What's the real question? Okay. The 4th one is one that, once again, Bill, you talked about just yesterday, which is the flow of ideas. To realize that things came from someplace. An idea came from someplace, it is where it is, and it's going to proceed. in mathematics, one of my mentors, R.H. Bing, said the time to work on a problem is after you solved it. You know, he was great at this. He would solve some unsolved problem in topology, and then he would get to work on it. And he did this overtly. He would say, can that result be extended even further? Can he apply that new insight that he had to solve that problem to some different problem, a different domain? Is it possible that that insight that allowed him to solve that problem only solved that one problem? No, that's impossible. Of course it's going to be applicable elsewhere. Of course you can extend it further. So the time to work on a problem is after you've solved it. There's always more. And what I'd like to propose right now is the question of in IBL instruction. You know, we are not at the end of the road in developing good techniques of IBL. Because, and here's the way I think about it. I want the students 100% of the time to be turning their minds in productive ways. You know, to be really engaged in thinking about the mathematics or thinking about problem solving and getting better at these things 100% of the time. And I think a lot of these techniques that we're talking about during this session increase the percentage of people who are in fact attentive more of the time. That's one of the features that it has. It gets people to be involved because they have to, when they're talking, they're involved, you know. When they're actually explaining, I always think of it as the challenge is, can you get somebody to explain something to themselves, something that they don't know? You know, what a great challenge. You know, and you can, of course. That's what happened in humanity. That's why ideas came about, is because we explained things to ourselves that we didn't know. So to me, one of the challenges for IBL is to envision, where is the future of this? And this is in your hands. Of all these new ideas, in fact, I had just last night, by the way, from David, you and Ted both said that there's a point in having individuals do things instead of working in groups. Namely, they get that satisfaction of individual success. And I was persuaded. So what I'm going to do is modify it, because I told you that my new method is to have them come up in groups. And so I'm thinking, okay, I want both worlds, because I like the groups, because they're really productive. They're engaged with each other. I think it's a great method. On the other hand, I really like the fact that you want an individual to feel that sense of personal satisfaction in conquering something. So I think what I'm going to try this fall is to have some of my problems designated as individual problems, and most of them the group kind, and then just see how that works. You know, so I'm going to try different things, because we're all going to move on, and I'm going to get ideas from you, and you're going to get ideas from each other, and we're going to improve this thing. You know. Okay, so that's the fourth one. And by the way, how are you going to remember these elements?
By the book.
Exactly. And for every one of your students, too. You can watch the video. Now, the way you're going to remember them is because you know, because of your knowledge of physics, that there are 4 elements. Right?
Earth, water,
Exactly. Earth, deep understanding. Fire, make mistakes, it's fearful. You know. Air, questions are in the air. Flow, the flow of ideas. You see, so it's a mnemonic for this. You see, those are the 4 elements. And that, you may be wondering, what's the 5th element? So in ancient Greek philosophy, the 5th element, the quintessential element, was the element that comprised the heavens. And it was the unchanging element. All the others would interact with each other, but the ether, which the 5th element, the quintessential element, was unchanging. And so, ironically, our 5th element is change. Change. That in fact, that's the unchanging element, is that we're all going to be changing. Students are changing, we're changing. Change is what's going to happen. But more specifically than that is to think about the fact that when we're trying to make somebody do something better, it may be better to think of asking, what are they doing different? What different task is it that a person who's successful does compared to a person who's not successful? So I'll give you a non-math metaphor and then one math one, and then I'm done, okay? The non-math one is if you're learning to play tennis, a beginning tennis player does this. The ball comes over the net, So let's say this is the net. The net's like this. I'm standing here on the tennis player. Ball comes over the net, swing. Ball comes over the net, swing. This is a beginning tennis player. You watch a film of Roger Federer or Nadal or any of these great players. Ball comes over the net, swing. You know, ball comes over the net, swing. Their head is looking at the location where the ball strikes the racket. And you can take a photograph of it, it's like that every time. They're doing a different job. The person who's the beginner, who's predicting where the ball is going to be as it comes over the net and guessing, that's a much more challenging job than watching the ball actually strike the racket. By the way, that's not the only difference. But it's a difference. And so by looking at the idea that an expert is doing something, a different task, then it changes. You're not saying, okay, bear down and really try harder. That's not the thing. It's a question of doing something different. You know, actually practicing these things, making a mistake. That's going to lead you on. Thinking about what the fundamentals are. That's going to lead you on. Raising questions. That leads you on. Where did things come from? Where are they going? That's leading you on. There are techniques you can use in your own mind in order to make progress. You see? So an expert in mathematics, why can we do calculus problems on page 736 of this big calculus book, and the kids can't? Because we know there are two ideas of calculus, the derivative of the integral, and we're seeing some variation of it on page 736. You know? So we apply that previous knowledge to it. It makes sense to us. It's meaningful. So one thing that we can do is try to encourage our students to, and build it into the classroom, to behave in a different way, more like the expert, of really making meaning out of the subjects that they're learning. So to me, we're in a great profession, you know, and we're in the profession of changing people, and this strategy of where we have real engagement in the students and coming, you know, personally challenging them to think through things and pushing the level of their own abilities, that I think can make a difference that lasts a lifetime. So, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much. I think we're all fired up to get back to work on this last day. Right, and we'll keep our eye out on the ether while we're lighting a fire and picking up the earth. Okay.
Excellent.
We'll start.